just covering two other important Kabbalah books, Sfarim. What is the Sefer Yetzira?
That's a surprisingly difficult question. Sefer Yetzira is probably the most enigmatic book in the canon of Jewish literature. Maybe somebody would argue with me about that, but it's certainly a very, very enigmatic work from a variety of perspectives. Let's just begin with authorship dating. So you may know that traditionally it's attributed to Avram Avinu. That's not an attribution that modern scholars take seriously, modern academic scholars. And the fact of the matter is that there were medieval scholars as well who cast doubt on that possibility. Judah Barzilai, who wrote an influential commentary on Sefer Yetzira in the Middle Ages, says, how could it be, or is at least skeptical about how it could be that Avraham is the author if it's never mentioned in the Torah, and if Avraham is the author, how come it's not included as a book of the Torah? Other questions along those lines. But that doesn't, saying that it's not by Avraham, though, hardly solves the problem. And if you look at the scholarly landscape, the modern scholarly landscape, I don't know if there's a work that has a greater range in suggested dates. Modern academic scholars have said the work goes as far back as the Second Temple period, as Beit Sheni. Others have said, no, it's a Geonic work. So you really have this massive range, which I think is in part a sign of we're simply not sure. We simply don't have a good sense of when it was written and who wrote it. Now, that's dating and authorship. Its meaning, though, is equally enigmatic. It's very short. You could, if you're so inclined, spend a couple hours and get through the whole text. But it's highly unclear. At base, it argues that the world was created with 10 sfirot and 22 letters, although what exactly sfirot means in the context of Sefer Yetzira is also unclear. And I should say, we think of it as a Kabbalistic work. But in point of fact, before any Kabbalist ever commented on it, philosophers commented on it. There's a commentary on Sefer Yetzira, for example, by Sadia Gaon. So at the turn of the 10th century, who understood the Sfirot in highly different terms than the way Mikbalim later on understood it. Now, eventually, it did indeed become a work that Mikbalim took more interest in than philosophers, and eventually became to be seen as a core work of Kabbalah. But it should be known that there were readings that predate Kabbalistic readings that read it along more rationalist, more philosophic lines.
And without giving away too much about your upcoming book, when is it going to be published?
That's a good question. There's still some time. Okay. I've made a lot of progress, but it's not there quite yet.
Historians will argue about the date of its publication.
Right.
So without giving too much away, what is the Sefer HaBahir?
I think you're going to maybe see a theme from this answer, and the theme is that a lot of the classic works of Kabbalah are enigmatic and very difficult to date. And often there are disputes between traditional Kabbalists and academics, but also between traditional Kabbalists themselves and between Kabbalists and non-Kabbalists, often figures more philosophically inclined, more rationally inclined. So let me begin by saying, and I'll answer this the same way as I did the Sefer Yetzira, start with dating. So the first time the work is mentioned is in the 13th century. But that's not when the work is from. Mekubalim saw it as an early midrashic work. It's often referred to as Midrasho Shel Rav Nechunya ben Hakana. That's how, for example, the Ramban refers to it. Now, the text doesn't make an internal claim that Nechunya ben Hakana wrote it. It just begins, Amar Rav Nechunya ben Hakana. but it reads like a midrashic work, meaning there are many different figures, rabbinic figures, some known from traditional rabbinic literature, some not known, who appear in the work. I should say that there were medieval scholars who were more rationally inclined. The most notable was Meir ben Shimon of Narbonne, who was a 13th century, primarily halachic scholar, who rejected the work as a forgery, thought it was impossible that Nechunya ben Akana could have written it. But as I say, it became very established as a Kabbalistic work. Kabbalists saw it as, along with the Zohar, a work by Chazal about Kabbalah. Now, from an academic point of view, scholars reject that it's a work from the time of Chazal. And I would say the predominant scholarly view, which I don't necessarily fully agree with, is that it's a layered work. There's a layer from the Gaonic period. There's another layer from Germany in the medieval period. There's a third layer from southern France. It's kind of a work that accrued over time and grew. Other scholars, which is a view that I'm wrestling with myself now, tend to see it as a work written by a single author, although when exactly that single author wrote it would also remain an open question. In terms of its meaning, it's also a strange work. Its Hebrew is really just from a literary point of view, it's not great Hebrew. There's Aramaic interspersed occasionally, and it's unclear why that's the case. It has parables that are famously difficult, that seem to confound rather than make things easier to understand. There's a lack of organizational structure. It's unclear, always why one passage follows the next. So it presents a lot of challenges in terms of its structure and its organization. It reads like a midrash. The term sfirot appears only 3 times in the whole work, and those 3 times are in the same context. You can kind of see them as one time. But it was widely understood by Kabbalists as talking about the sfirot only in other terms. And this is how many academic scholars understand it as well. Although I should say recent scholarship has questioned this position and has argued that maybe it shouldn't all be read in terms of the sfirot, and maybe there are other theologies at play as well. And I guess I'll leave it there, and you can read my introduction when it comes out for a fuller account.
Okay.